Hi, fourth graders. Mrs. Somick here for our final mini lesson, but we're going to actually spend 2 days on this because it's kind of a big deal. We're going to talk about today here conflict and tension. Because guess what? Stories have conflict and tension. Okay. Now we're going to get to know what we mean by that, but we're also going to learn as readers how do we use the clues from the story to reveal the conflict, and then also how is that conflict resolved? Because we've talked about resolution, and I know last week, before Thanksgiving break, we did have some questions about what the resolution of the story was, and I know we still need to kind of work on that a little bit. So let's spend a couple of days on that. So we know readers of fiction, we notice that the characters in the story that we read often have some kind of conflict, which we know is also called the problem. Now, the world of the stories often revolve around how that character reacts and how they resolve the problem. So today we're going to look at a historical fiction story. So it's a made up story, but it's based on something that actually happened in history, okay, called The Last Bicycle. And we're going to identify the conflict and the type of conflict the characters face. So my vocabulary today talks about conflict resolution and how in fictional stories, what that means, what different types of conflict you may be faced as readers. So let's take a quick look here.
You know, being a pilgrim is pretty cool. We've got toys, we've got dancing, and then we've got the 12-hour work days and a super strict dress code. Okay, so it's not all rainbows and unicorns, but one thing we're getting better at is resolving our conflicts. A conflict is when two people can't agree on something. It happens all the time. Seems like Hester and Nathaniel can't agree whether to make dry cornbread or extra dry cornbread. Bartholomew and George are arguing about whose giant hat is cooler. Martha and Abigail both want to churn butter, and when Martha tries to explain why she needs to churn butter first, Abigail interrupts her.
I really need to churn the butter to make the
She's a witch!
John wants to name this land New England, while Patrick wants to call it Patrickstan. Conflicts usually start out small, but they can get ugly. You start feeling frustrated. You get mad. Sometimes you start calling someone a name. They say something mean back. One thing leads to another. Soon, maybe you're even physically fighting. It's not a good look. But we don't want to live in a world where people are fighting all the time. If we were fighting all the time, we wouldn't have time to play with the toys and do the dances I mentioned earlier. Yeah, we all get in conflicts, but that doesn't mean we have to let them get out of hand. So whether you're a pilgrim or a regular person, here are 4 tips for when you're having a conflict with someone. Number 1, let the other person talk and really listen to what they have to say. Don't interrupt them. That's rude and obnoxious. Number 2, try to come up with compromises. Like, maybe we could make dry cornbread today and extra dry cornbread tomorrow. Number 3, take a moment to cool down and think, is this worth having a conflict over? You really want to yell and scream because someone cut you in line for the water fountain? The water fountain will not run out of water. You'll be okay. Number 4, ask an adult for help. I don't mean some random adult. That would be weird. I mean a teacher, a parent, a coach. You get the idea. I went through that pretty quickly, so let's summarize. Got a conflict? Number 1, listen. Number 2, compromise. Number 3, relax and let it go. Number 4, ask for help. Not only will this help you not get into fights, but it feels good to be the bigger person, to listen, and to be okay with letting things go. Now, let's see how the other pilgrims did. Hey, seems like Abigail's really listening to Martha, which makes her realize that Martha isn't a witch after all. Looks like Hester and Nathaniel compromised on the topic of cornbread. Bartholomew and George realized that fighting about whose hat is cooler just isn't worth it. Patrick and John asked the blacksmith to help them pick a name for the land. Let's just say they went with New England. Anyway, you too can use these simple steps to resolve your conflict.
All right. So I know we've talked a lot about conflict resolution, even in our own lives. And so I've related this back here to how our characters are going to have to figure out how they're going to resolve conflict in the story. So there's some great life tips for you as well in that. So, as we can see here, okay, we're going to actually create kind of a booklet tomorrow because there's so much great information here about different types of conflicts. And these are going to be kind of conflicts we saw in our video. Now, if you look here, we have either external conflicts or internal conflicts, and there's 4 different ones. If you look at the external ones, okay, that means that you can have a person versus a person. A lot of what we saw in the video was a person having an issue with another person. So that's just person versus person. Now, sometimes you're going to have a conflict where the character has something in nature that they're struggling with. Okay, so maybe something that they're encountering in nature is causing the problem. Maybe the character is having an issue with society. Maybe there's something in the community that's causing issues for them or causing conflict. So that's person versus society. Now, this whole other one, the 4th person is person versus self, because that's what we call an internal conflict. That's a problem that you are dealing with about yourself. So as you can see here, okay, is the character struggle that takes place in his or her own mind. So this type of conflict usually has something to do with making the right choice. What's right, what's wrong. Maybe they're overcome with their own emotions or they have mixed feelings about them. So we have this chart here that we're going to use to help us kind of refer as we go through here today's story. I already told you this is a historical text called The Last Bicycle. And we're going to pull out some clues here. I'm going to try to help you guys figure out, is this person versus person, person versus nature, person versus society, or are they having the problem with themselves, person versus self? Okay. All right. So let me pull up the story so you can see it a little bit larger here. And I'm just going to zoom in a little bit so we can see a little clearer on our boards. Okay. All right, let's get started and try to pull out some of those clues. The Last Bicycle by Betty X. Davis. Jaquise couldn't keep from grinning as he rode his bicycle along the cobblestone road, past the old castle and down the town square. And from a mile away, he could hear singing and cheering as the townfolk celebrated the end of Hitler's war. That day, August 26, 1944, Charles de Gaulle marched triumphantly into Paris, and the proud song of La Marseillaise lifted millions of hearts. Jaquise not only grinned for France, but also because he had found the last bicycle in town. His friends stopped in their trucks when they saw his bicycle. "Hey, Jaquise, where'd you get that bike?" Jaquise felt a lump in his throat, and then he squeezed out the words, "My brother Philip hid it very well." The boys fell quiet. Pierre, one of Jaquise's schoolmates, said at last, "It sure is a beautiful bike." Yes, Philip loved it. "Hey, anyone want to ride?" The boys clamored, "Me, me! Let's ride it, Jaquise." And after they took turns, Pierre offered, "I'll pay 10 francs for it." Jaquise laughed. "It's not for sale." The bicycle was priceless beyond measure. Almost nothing was for sale in Erzar, not bicycles or cars or fuel, only secondhand clothes and rusty tools. Food was scarce. Edgy, wary of danger, people emerged from their stone cottages and scattered farms, getting used to a world without constant fear. A few shops and an inn opened. Trains ran, carrying mostly troops. But no one forgot the awfulness of war, especially Jaquise. 4 years earlier, Philip had told him, "I heard that in Chignon the enemy torched the buildings and smashed whatever was left. They'll come here next." Jaquise's family hid whatever they could in the rubble of the old castle. Jaquise and Philip stashed the bicycle up in the tower. The enemy raided the castle soon after. The bicycle survived. But Philip, kind, handsome Philip, went to war for his beloved France and didn't return. For Jaquise, nothing would ever be the same, though now he could finally once more breathe the air of freedom. So just from this beginning here, I can see that this bicycle seems very, very important to Jaquise because why? It was a reminder of his relationship with his brother, and his brother has now passed away. So when he holds on to this bicycle, it helps remind him of his brother. He even says when one of the boys asks, "I'll pay you 10 francs for it." And he said, "Whoa, this is not for sale because it's priceless beyond measure." That's how he feels about it. All right, so let's keep going. One morning, he pedaled along past the vineyards, the scent of the newly replanted grapes on the breeze. The French countryside was coming alive, and he turned onto the paved highway that led to Paris. Ahead, he saw a man in soldier's clothing. Jaquise's stomach tightened. Recently, there had been rumors that enemy spies still hid in the countryside. Jaquise again tasted the bitterness of fear, and the uniform, dusty and worn, was not French. The stranger soldiers hunched under a heavy backpack, straightened as he turned and stared at Jaquise and then at the bicycle. Philip's bicycle. Jaquise gripped the handlebars until his knuckles turned white. Jaquise tried to sound normal and unafraid. Bonjour, monsieur. Comment à la vase? Bonjour, I'm sorry, I don't speak French very well, the man answered. Jaquise was relieved. You're an American. Why are you still here? I stayed behind to treat small children. I'm an army doctor. You care for the French as well as Americans? Jaquise asked. Of course. There's been an outbreak of scarlet fever. Jaquise could see the exhaustion on the man's face. I've come from the train station. I missed the last train to Paris, and now I might lose my place on the ship that would take me back to America. His shoulders drooped. You see, my father's very ill, and I must get home. And then a hopeful spark lit up his face. May I borrow your bicycle, son? Borrow? I'd never get it back. The man pulled a gun from his backpack, and Jaquise drew back. I'll give you anything. This gun is valuable. I'll trade it for the bicycle. Jaquise shook his head. No guns. So I can see right now that the conflict now has been revealed. There is a problem. Jaquise has a decision to make. Is he going to help the American Army doctor make his way home? Or is he going to hold on to that bicycle that reminds him so fondly of his beloved brother? You know, this is a decision that Jaquise has to make for himself. And knowing that, let's look back at our chart here. Here we go. So looking at the chart, can we identify what kind of conflict Jaquise is facing? Can you figure it out? Is it person versus person? Is Jaquise facing something in nature or in society? Or is he having a problem with his own thoughts, a struggle in his own mind? That's right. Since this is a decision Jaquise must make for himself in his heart and in his mind, this is an example of that internal conflict that we call person versus self. So now we know the conflict and the type of conflict. Let's figure out how Jaquise will resolve this internal conflict and how his decisions is going to impact the story's resolution. Okay, how the problem is solved and what that central message is here. Here we go. But Jaquise saw the desperation in the man's face, and he remembered that American boys had died alongside Philip. America helped liberate France, but Philip's bicycle, did Jaquise owe it to this man? Jaquise slowly relaxed his grip, and then, as if it had life of its own, the bicycle was suddenly in the hands of the American. So he made that decision to give it to him. You'll not be sorry, I promise. I'll send you an even nicer bicycle from Texas. The man looked on the identification on the handlebars. Thank you, Philip DuPont. With all my heart, I thank you. As he says, he jumped on the bicycle, pedaling away. My name is Jaquise, the boy called after him. The doctor turned back and nodded. Jaquise watched him grow smaller and smaller as he cycled up the road. When his friends heard what Jaquise had done, they yelled at him, Jaquise, you're crazy. You gave away the last bicycle in town. Day after day, month after month, Jaquise waited for the promised bicycle. Always, the station master shook his head. Slowly, Azar found its way back to an ordinary life, and trains once again arrived on time. Food, clothes, books, even an old car could be bought, but still no bicycles. Then one spring day, when the fields were blooming with the fleurs de casal, they looked like sunshine. Jaquise heard the whistle of a train. And when he walked by the station master called out, Vin vite, Jaquise, come look. When Jaquise saw the shiny new bicycle, he felt joy bursting inside him. He had been right to trust the doctor, and with his hands on the handlebars, he grinned and claimed his prize. Ready to zoom away, he put his foot on the pedal, but the station master stopped him. Wait, Jaquise, you must sign for the rest. The rest? Jaquise scratched his head in puzzlement. Yes, indeed, the station master said, handing Jaquise an official paper to sign. He gestured for Jaquise to follow him towards the boxcar, and joined by the assistant station master and the ticket clerk. Then Jaquise's jaw dropped as the man began unloading 99 shiny new bicycles from the train. The station master handed Jaquise a note. For Jaquise Dupont, for you and your friends in Azar, 100 thanks. Your grateful American friend, Stephen L. M.D. Thanks, Doc, Jaquise whispered, and Felipe, merci beaucoup. One morning, as he pedaled past the vineyards, the scent of newly replanted... Oh, sorry, I've already read that part. Silly mistake. Okay, so that, I was ready to go for another page, apparently. So that was the end of our story here as we come back. Pretty amazing, right? Okay, so we've identified what the problem is. He made a decision. He decided to give the bicycle to the American doctor, and then how was the conflict resolved? What was the solution that's going to help us understand that central message? Now, this is going to be the Google Doc that you will fill out on your own, but I'm going to talk you through it here and, of course, put it in your own words. So in order to figure out and look at the conflict in our story, we're going to use this chart. Our characters, what the conflict was, the climax, that's the top of the party, the most important part of the tension, where the tension hits the very top, almost like that roller coaster, right before it's about to be resolved. Then the character's going to make a decision that's then going to go towards the resolution here. Okay, so who were the characters that we met in our story? All right, we know it was Jaquise, right? Okay, and what information do we know about Jaquise? We know that he's riding his bicycle and the war's over, right? And Jaquise is the last bike in town. But then there seems to be some kind of conflict. What are some of the smaller problems here that we're getting into in our story? Well, we know that there's different problems. We know that obviously the main problem is that internal problem, right? Should Jaquise give away the bicycle he and his brother hid together? Should he do that? That was that person versus self. There are some smaller problems, though. You know, they're getting back from a war. There's no other bicycles in town. And also the army doctor has no way of getting home. So all of this works kind of together. Now, what was that climax? The part of the story where there was the most tension, right? What is Jaquise going to do? What does he do? He is struggling, okay, to give away the bicycle and help the American doctor. So he's asking himself, what is he going to do? Now, he makes an important decision, which is going to go towards our falling action here, okay? He thinks of his brother. You know what? His brother helped the Americans, right? Or excuse me, the Americans helped alongside his brother in fighting in the war. So he decides to give the bike to the American, right? And then what does the American doctor say? I promise to send even a better bike from Texas. So we have that kind of falling. So we've made a decision, and this is now leading to the resolution. How is the conflict resolved? What was the solution to our story? Do you remember? Okay. So he notices the train finally arrives. Not only does he get a new bicycle, but also they send additional 99 bicycles. So 100 bicycles there sent from the doctor as a way of saying thank you. And that is how the story was resolved. All right, friends. So just remember, as readers, it's important that we pay careful attention to the world of the story that we read. One element of that story is the conflict. And when we're reading, notice the clues that reveal the conflict or the tension in the story, and how does it move towards that resolution? How is the story resolved? That's going to help us understand the world created in the story and also that important theme, right? As we continue our study of fiction, let's make sure to identify the conflict or the problem in our stories and differentiate the different types of conflicts, the different kind of conflicts our characters can be facing. So this is going to be what we're going to study a little bit more in detail tomorrow with man versus self, or person versus self, I should say, person versus nature, person versus society, and then also person versus themselves, okay, or versus other people. So these 4 different types of conflicts we're going to take a look at closer tomorrow. Don't forget to fill out your Google charts here, your Google Doc, and your classroom assignment. And I can't wait to see your feedback on that tomorrow. All right, friends, stay tuned for our last lesson in fiction tomorrow.